Rosalys Peel came to the senior center not too long ago. I guess it seems like a lifetime ago, given all that's changed in the last few months. And she was talking to us about her book, Mike and Me, which shares her experience of living with her husband at home as his Alzheimer's progressed, and the challenges and the gifts that that experience gave her. And she and I were talking a little bit, and she said that the experience of living in a stay-home situation in those days is giving her a little perspective about the right way to respond to the stay home, stay healthy directive that we're living with now. So, Rosalys, thanks for joining us, and I'll just hand over the microphone to you for a little bit. But if anybody is listening that has questions, please either put them in the chat box, or when we invite you to, you can open up your microphone and share your questions. Thank you very much for coming, Rosalys.
Thank you, Reed. I have to say, this is really fun. I mean, I'm brand new at this kind of visual presentation. Matter of fact, I'd say it's the first visual presentation I've done. I've done a couple of interviews, which were kind of fun, but that was different than having a live audience. So you're my practice audience, and I'm open for all thoughts and considerations. Gosh, where do I start? Let me give you a little introduction about the book, and some of you may have heard me before when I was at the senior center. So my husband was diagnosed with Alzheimer's in 2002. He died in 2011. So that journey was 9.5 years. And one of the things that popped up pretty early for Mike was that he did not want to do this away from me and away from his home. And without thinking much, I jumped in and said, oh yeah, we'll do this at home. Well, that was a big commitment, and I really did not know exactly what I'd bought into. However, I just kind of kept assessing it as we went along, never knowing if it would be possible, and certainly knowing that what we were able to do at home may not be feasible for someone else. But that's how the book came about, because people watched what we did and how we did it, and they really wanted to know more about that. And it basically gives hope to a lot of people. When we walked into the journey, we were told that Mike would be in a care facility the last 2 years. And I anticipated that's what would happen. I also had a lot of other fears around him harming me, running away, stealing the car, hurting people, aggressive behavior. And I certainly knew or thought I knew he would not know me at the end of the day. And it turned out that none of those things happened, much to my surprise. And it just seemed worthy of telling other people that it's possible to have a different journey. It doesn't mean that everybody's going to go down the path we did, but I think in writing the book, and now I know, having heard from people who've read the book, it gives a lot of hope that you might be able to do this different. And I think one of the things that was really interesting in being able to write the book, I came from kind of a different background in the respect that I'd been a parent educator forever and had been teaching childbirth education and parent couples. So I knew about growth and development, and I was able to take that and recognize that in fact some of Mike's skills were regressing as we went along, and I was able to think about some of the things I did when my children were younger and that worked really well for us, and how we did things together, such as helping somebody get dressed. That's not so hard if you think about how you helped somebody when they were younger and being able to get dressed, and eating meals out, what we ate and how we did it, and foods that were easier were better than a fancy meal at night. So anyway, those things came into play and are part of the story. And then the other thing that was unusual is I had been working with John Gottman, University of Washington, who's a well-known couple relationship researcher. And it was really valuable because right at my fingertips were couple relationship tips, things that kept our relationship on track. So amazing as it was to me, Mike still knew me at the end of life, and I can honestly say we were still in love. So during that time, as things progressed, we certainly needed to stay home more and more. It got harder and harder to get out of the house. I did have a caregiver 1 day a week, and I did continue to teach at Swedish Hospital 1 day a week, which was wonderful for me to be out of the house. And I really go back and think about people who are taking this journey now at home, because they're losing some of the support people they had. I certainly have my daughter and son who came in, And I kind of think it's a double complicated issue now, because people may not only be losing the support people they've been able to use in the same situation as Mike and I had, but I think there's probably a genuine fear about people using care facilities. So I always knew that was my backup. And if I was in the middle of this now with Mike, to think that I would not maybe want to have him go to a care facility, that would be a whole different challenge. So jumping from there, and I'm going to open this up to questions sooner than later, I just want to say there were things that we did that made living at home possible. And so I want to share some of those with you. And I don't really know my audience today. You know, it's always fun when I speak in person. I can kind of tell who's out there who might be dealing with dementia, also who's a single, who's a couple, and that makes a difference in what I say. So today I don't really know that about the people who are sitting in, except I will say that now I'm doing stay at home and I am a single. And so it's a different journey than what Mike was here. And many of the tips in my book are to help people, you know, when you're living together and relying on each other. So this is a little bit different, but I've got some little tips I want to share, and maybe I'll just give you a couple of ideas, and then I want to open it up because I don't want to keep talking, and Reed may have thoughts too. So I guess one of the things I'm going to say right off the top, and I'm sure you've all figured it out, but for Mike and I, and now for me, a routine is absolutely critical. And I find for myself, it's easy to say, oh, I'll just sleep in a little bit easier. There's nothing going on my calendar. And I think that's one of the nice things about the senior center is there's lots of things you can jump in and lots of things you can do and have a routine. And I know one of your regular people who come, she's mentioned on a number of occasions that just knowing there were these talks Monday through Friday, 11:30, that was part of their routine. So I would say having a routine right now is key for all of us if we're a single or if you're living with somebody. And then I'm going to put one more out there, and that's just that I was journaling, and journals were real important to me, not only because I could document what was happening with Mike, with the thought that maybe, because people have told me I should write about this, maybe someday I would write a book. And so I thought, let me document what's working and what's not working so it'll be there for me later. So actually, I put myself in a spot where I could show you something. So if you look up here on my shelf, let's see if I can do this with earbuds in. I have multiple little notebooks. They're not fancy, but these were my journal notes. I think I did 7 altogether during Mike's illness. They're all tabbed right now. They've got wonderful tabs in them because I wrote a book and I had to go back and look for certain things when I had a topic. I tried to go back and find out when things happened so I could chronicleize the time frame. And I just want to put that out to everybody right now. If you're up for it, even if you've never been a journaler, which I was not particularly a journaler before, I think right now we are living through fascinating history. And I think just get a paper and pencil down. We get so much that comes to us, you know, on different media, but to actually write it in a journal note and also write some of your family stories in there for your kids and your grandchildren. I just had a fun project just before the whole thing happened for shutdown, and I needed to write a little bit about what it was like when I was 8 years old. And this was a letter to my grandson who was 8, and it was a homework assignment. And I just think what a beautiful gift that was to write him a letter about what I remember about being 8. And it was a lot of fun too. So I want to encourage journal notes and routine. So I want to open it up before I say any more and see what your thoughts are about that. If you're doing some of it or if you've got other things you want to add.
Well, I have a question about journaling. I'm wondering, when you started the work of trying to capture your time with Mike, had you been writing before, or was this a new experience? And if so, how did you keep yourself on track to keep making those notes? Because it's hard for some of us who have not been journalists or journal writers.
Yes, I have to say I was not a journal writer. Maybe way back when in my teens, maybe I had a diary at some point, like at 13, I think I did. But Mike actually was the one that gave me the clue about that. In, gosh, I think it was about 2002, I went through breast cancer. And Mike is the one who said to me, you should write about that. You should keep track of what medications you were given, when surgeries were done, and you should just document that so you have a good medical history. And he came from the background of being a federal agent for customs. So he was used to documenting and clearly describing situations. So that was the first time I really did it. And I did it during that illness. And I have to say, I went back to that many times to remember what medications I'd used for how long and what that process was. So when Mike had Alzheimer's and people were saying to me, you should write about this later, I hadn't really given that a lot of thought, but I had started putting down what the doctors told us, what medications he was on, when he started them, what the doses were. And then once I got the idea of writing, I added to that. And it was nice also because I started talking about my feelings. I talked about how sad it was. I talked about things I couldn't do with Mike anymore. I talked about being lonely, being stuck at home. And I think just doing that was helpful for me in lots of ways. And it turned out to be a book as well.
So you could write in a way that didn't like have to put on a certain face, a certain strength or sense of having it all together in a journal that maybe if you were writing letters, it would have been harder.
Or even what I would have said to someone else. And it turned out after Mike was gone, I continued to journal, because I just discovered I really missed talking to him. And I just needed to talk to Mike. So most of my journal entries were, hi, Mike, just needed to touch base. And having that little daily conversation with someone you love, if you've got a partner in your life, we should all be doing that at the end of the day, touching base and saying, well, how'd things go? It might be as simple as you had a nice phone call from one of your kids, or it might be that you like the pot roast you made. Who knows what you talk about? Nothing major. But when you're alone and you don't have anybody to do that with, my journal let me do it. And I just needed to talk to Mike. It made it a lot easier.
So now are you using it during this time?
It was interesting. I took a little break for a while and I'm back to it a little bit. And I have to share something very nice in my life, which is I have a new friend. It's a male friend, and happens to be a friend of Jim, who's on with us today. They'd known each other way back when through work. And so I had known him for 3 years informally, and then he asked me out 2 years ago. So Mike's been gone 9 years. And so I started going out with Ken Nelson, a local here on the island, born and raised. And that's made a big difference to me. So it's interesting because now I get to talk to Ken each day. We have a little phone call. It's kind of our daily conversation. And I've discovered I don't have to write in my journal as much. So the journaling comes and goes in my life as it's necessary.
And if anybody else has a question, all you need to do is open up your microphone and pop out with it. I will ask you, anybody here, if you've maybe made some contacts over the phone that you didn't make before the pandemic, that you're starting to have some new connections with people that you haven't touched base with. The other possibility is that you might be writing more letters.
This is a comment. What's her name?
Rosalys.
Alice.
Rosalys.
Hi, Rosalys. This is a comment. I just thought it was so significant for you to mention that when Mike was still living and you could journal, that you could say the things that you couldn't say to him. Yes. And it was such a good way for you to be honest with yourself and touch your own feelings. And you wouldn't say that necessarily to him or to your immediate family, but it just seemed very, very good to me.
Thank you, Mary. And Mary,
that was actually Bonnie.
Bonnie. Okay. I think Bonnie's the one who told me about this format and encouraged me to check it out.
Oh, yeah. But, yes. Yeah.
But Yes, I have to say that's true, but I also want to add one other little piece to that. One of the things that I think was unusual about what Mike and I did is we never stopped talking to each other. So, even late in the illness, I could say to him, we had a hard day, or I was a little
Okay.
grumpy today, or I wish I hadn't done that. I did realize that, if something was really hard, I couldn't burden him with that because he was doing all he could to do the
Right.
best job he could. So it was kind of a balancing act. But some people stop talking to their loved one with Alzheimer's. And we just had this little conversation each night. And so I
Wonderful.
really did talk to him about most things. But once in a while, there was a few things that I didn't think I shouldn't be telling him those. It was just too hard. It was just too hard.
During this time, I came in a few minutes late, but did you also have help?
Yes. And the two things that were really, really helpful, I have two children. My son was teaching back on the East Coast, so he kind of bopped in and out, and lived in Seattle when he was here. So he wasn't here as much. But my daughter was very local and actually had a baby in year 7 of Mike's illness, and he lived 9.5 years. And I really did not want to lose out on time with our granddaughter. So she was with us
Right.
one day a week while my daughter went to work. And I have to say, that was a real perk for both Mike and I when she was here. As a little baby,
Sure.
pretty easy. And then when she started crawling and getting more active that day, I actually had one of my daughter's friends come in. I hired her. So she was here the same time as the granddaughter was here, which I
Okay.
just needed 2 sets of hands. Mike was in a wheelchair later on, and I couldn't do both together. But having the granddaughter here was absolutely wonderful. So yeah, I had one person a day who came and helped, and then a hired professional one day a week, and that was when I was going in to teach in the city. And then another day when I had the granddaughter, and this is towards the end, I had somebody else come. But yeah, and then I just have to say, talk about this friends and communities, that people who I know aren't here for some of us now. I had friends from California who rotated and stayed a week, just long-term friends. 2 sisters did that. It was phenomenal. I don't even know. I mean, people I hadn't seen other than Christmas cards, they were contacting me and saying, I'd want to come help. Phenomenal. Yeah.
Well, that has something to do with you. I can feel your warmth just in this few minutes. I mean,
More than,
Thank you.
something
this is
to do.
Charlton, it's more than something to do with you. I think because of the kind of person you are, Rosalind, and you've shown us the kind of person you are, this created an environment and an experience for all these people because it was a rich thing that you were offering up on a plate, really, of your personality, and it was really strong. I'm really bowled over by all you've said and your control of the material. You've got a great deal to say, but it's all organized and the way you talk about it, you talk so easily and convincingly about it. And
Thank you.
I'm just extremely, very grateful, especially because I kept my mic turned off because I might miss something.
I have to say, I really, really appreciate that. And I think, again, I have to say that comes from that unusual background from teaching parent education classes.
No doubt.
So speaking and presenting, that was all, that was pretty comfortable for me. So that was fortunate. And then I have to say, there was one other piece that I had to give up, and it was okay. I just had to learn to do it. You really have to give up control of a lot of things, having people come in your home, even the person who came one day a week, which was great. You just discover that, the blankets on the bed for Mike were folded different, windows were open, you had leftover lunches in your refrigerator, things were in different places, and you have to let all of that go. I mean, and that was strange actually when he passed away, because we had hospice who came in and, checked on Mike on, a day. And I had, a neighbor who might come by. So that again is what's so different about this time right now with stay at home. Those people were kind of floating in and out, not really providing a lot of care for Mike. But I cannot imagine the isolation of doing what we did right now during coronavirus. My heart just goes out to people who are doing this because it's a different journey.
Yes.
I do know that that some support services are still available. I
Yes.
do know that some physical therapy for people who are eligible for that is still going on. But yes, it is a much different world. And of course, everybody wearing masks and everything can be a little off-putting if you don't really know what's going on.
Right.
And we don't know how long it's going to last.
Right. The two situations I know in particular, one person is a very dear friend whose husband has Lou Gehrig's disease right now.
Oh.
And it's interesting too, because she'd read my book early on, and then she came back and read it during this illness. And what's nice about the book is different stories, it's all stories. So different chapters have different parts to them. Like there's a chapter on speech. There's one on movement and activity. Support groups is another chapter. Friends and families, another chapter. So she's able to just read the chapters that apply to them right now. And you can read it. It's designed to be a guide. So little stories with insights at the end of the chapter, which is really fun. So anyway, she got back to me and she said, your book is so helpful right now, because she could look things up. And then I got to see them recently, and I hadn't seen them in a while, just before we got into shutdown. I got to visit them, and her husband took me to one side, who's now in a wheelchair. And he said to me, your book is really helping her. And he said, she's so nice to me now. So I thought that was great. What more do I want from a book?
Does your book have an index?
It does, according to chapters. So the chapters tell you, what is in each chapter, so you can tell that. And I just have to give you one other nice compliment, which is my daughter-in-law is reading it for the first time. And she said, gosh, this is a great book for anybody. So it does tell a love story. It does tell you how you can manage, and just all different aspects in that respect. So I don't know if anybody else has something else there, and I have a couple of things I'll share with you too.
That's great. Anyone with a comment, or else we will definitely ask Rosalys to read a bit from her book.
Okay, I've got to fix my headband. This is specific for stay at home. The hair is way too long right now. It's the best I can do. So I just
you're in company.
Oh my gosh. So I mentioned routine to you, and then I just have a little note here I don't want to forget, and I want to mention sleep as well. So sleep was a big deal. It was really important for Mike's brain. I mean, if he didn't get enough sleep, everything fell apart. And I think that's good advice for all of us. I'm 76, and so I'm right up there as well. And I just know that in the afternoon, I'll sometimes give myself a little 10 or 15-minute nap. And then when I do much better with things that I have to do later in the day. So be kind to yourself. And then I make myself get up in the morning. I don't want to sleep too late. And I actually go to bed a little bit later, because then I get a good chunk of sleep during the night. But sleep is part of that routine that I think we all need to think about. And then I want to mention laughter, and boy, there's good studies on laughter. I mean, it's just incredible what laughter can do. And that's actually what I'm going to read just a little bit out of the book in relationship to that. But I mentioned we had some California friends who would come up, two ladies in particular who'd taken Lamaze classes from me like 30 years before when I was in Southern California, and just long-term friends who said, I want to come and help. And they came up as a little team. And Marilyn and Claudia were so much fun. And in Mike and me, you get to meet them because I tell stories about when they were here. I mean, everything from cooking wonderful meals to telling old stories. And one I remember so clearly is I left Sabina, who was Mike's caregiver, and went to pick them up at the ferry. And it was time for Mike to take a nap. And this was late. Gosh, it was well into his 8th year, maybe his 9th year. And as I said, he lived 9.5 years. So he was in a wheelchair. And I went to pick him up at the ferry, and I said, let's go have lunch at the pub, which was going to be a great treat for me, out for lunch with two dear friends. And I knew Mike was good. He was going to take a nap. And we came home about 2 hours later, and he was still up. He was in his wheelchair, and Sabina was there. And I was so surprised when we came in the back door, because I knew it was nap time. We really stuck to these naps. And she said, I couldn't get him to take a nap. And, you know, he was pretty usually pretty congenial. And she said, he just told me no. And we got there, and in his broken speech at that point, he was able to say, I was waiting for you. So he had the ability to know I had gone to get these friends, and he wanted to see them. And he was not going to take a nap at that time. I mean, how sweet is that? And then fun and laughter just went from the moment they walked in until they left. One other quick story. We had a nice dinner, and actually another set of friends came over from Seattle. So I guess there was 6 of us all together, something like that. And he had a glass of wine.
What did you eat? What were you eating?
Oh, we ate everything that Mike liked, because that's what the ladies wanted. They did meatloaf, but the meatloaf he could actually pick up with his fingers, which was good. It was firm enough he could do that. And we had carrot sticks that were cooked that he could pick up with his fingers, which made it a lot easier. We certainly had homemade blueberry pie. Or blackberry pie. I'm sorry. It was blackberry time on the island. But we also had some red wine. And Claudia, Mike's glass was empty, which I had to help hold for him. And his glass was empty, and she was serving more wine. And he put his glass up. You know, he clearly wanted more wine. And she kind of looked at me, and I said, no, I don't think he needs more wine. And he really looked at her and held the glass up. And she said, I think he wants more wine. And he had more wine. So It was just, you know, we had such fun. And this is when it was theoretically time he would have been in a care facility, but we were still laughing and having fun. So what I'd like to read to you is just a little bit of an insight. So this is what the book looks like. It's huge on the screen right now. And we're happy about our medal, by the way. We won a Forward Indie Award, which is pretty great. As a new author, I was pretty happy about that. And then my co-person is Dan Zadra down here. I'll tell you a little story about him in a minute. He was just unusual. I met him, and he knew how to write books, and he could help me with editing, etc. So anyway, at the back of each of the chapters, there's little insights, and these are takeaways. So, you know, people read the book, but they can also go back and see little insights. Of course, my book is all marked up here, but these are what I said were like well, they are chapters.
Very good.
It gives you the page and different organizations. So I don't know. They're just all here. Celebrating our daughter's wedding, Mike's gift for the baby, little Riley and Grandpa Mike hit it off right away. Keep the music playing, the best medicine of all. So those are the chapters which will get you to the categories people might want. But anyway, I want to read to you the insights, and there's 4 of them. They're just right here at the end of the chapter on laughter. The Alzheimer's Association reminds that depression is common among people with Alzheimer's, especially during the early and middle stages. Could it be that a little daily laughter therapy, especially with friends and family, might be an antidote? 2, some cancer treatment centers have introduced daily laughter sessions for their patients. After a laughter session, patients have said things like, I didn't even think about cancer while I was laughing, and that felt great. Perhaps that can work for Alzheimer's couples too. 3, with the high cost of prescription drugs these days, we can all benefit from a natural therapy like laughter, which is free. 4, an article in the New York Times features a group called Nurses for Laughter at Oregon Health Science University. The nurses all wear buttons that say, warning, humor may be hazardous to your illness. I think that's a good affirmation and reminder for Alzheimer's couples too. So that's what the insights look like at the end of the chapter, and the little stories I just told you are in that chapter on laughter. So what else does anybody want to throw out here before we continue on?
You need to unmute yourself if you have a question or comment.
No, this is me. This is Pat. Yeah, I was going to say that my mother-in-law had Alzheimer's, and one thing that we really loved to do together, and I guess it kind of has to do with laughter, was singing. And
Yes.
she remembered all the words to all of these songs, and it was
Yes.
just wonderful.
Yes, yes, yes. I'm so glad you said that, because that was another little one that I kind of wanted to touch on. And I think laughter and singing are two things that we don't have to miss out on right now with staying at home. And for myself, being here by myself, I absolutely, middle of the day, will just turn on some music. And yeah, another one that is really interesting is we should be using our voices. And if you use your voice, it gets stronger. And if you don't use it, over time, it actually gets weaker. So it's like any other muscle, we should use it. So singing brings out laughter. It changes the mood in my home. And I'm not having grandchildren here now, but when I was, and there's 2 now in my life, which is fun. They are now 11 and 8. But if they're in my home and things are just kind of, we're not doing much, not much is happening. If I click on the music, it changes the whole theme of the house. And then I want to add one more thing, because you mentioned music, and this is really jumping off, not quite in the same category. But I want to plug that I now have it in audio version. I am so happy about this. I did this in December with Blackstone Publishing, and I'm the narrator. I can't believe it. That was nerve-wracking to go in and audition to be a narrator. But at any rate, I passed and I got to be the narrator, which is pretty fun. But I knew that their schedule was to read 3 days, 8 hours a day. I mean, 3 days, 8 hours a day of reading. They did tell me later that they don't usually do that. You usually get 4 or 5 days, because it's an 8-hour book. You usually get 4 or 5 days, but that's if you're a local person who's doing the reading. But they're in Ashland, and I wanted to go down to their studio. I just felt I would feel better being there, and I'd interviewed with them, so I wanted to be in their studio, which is what I did. And I knew I needed to build up to being able to read 8 hours a day. So I did that by reading from 6 to 8 in the morning. And then I did another reading from like 10 to 12, and then one in the afternoon, 2 to 4, and one more in the evening. So I actually built up to reading 8 hours a day. And honest and truly, my voice got better. My voice got stronger. And I just did not realize how I wasn't talking enough. So music's right up there. So thanks for the question. Let me bounce off in all different directions.
I'm wondering if you learned when you were going through the book to read it aloud, any changes that you might have made, or any ways that you might have made slight changes for the audiobook.
Yeah, they were slight. They really were not. We did a great job in our edits. I'm pretty proud of actually that. There really wasn't much for content or anything significant. What I did discover is when I wrote with a lot of commas. And I think it's the way we all learned how to write probably in our generation, just like, I don't know, just sort of like an intro thing. It's like in the meantime, and I would put a comma after that. And when it had official editing for all that, they took the commas out. And so when I was trying to read the narration, I had to, in my book, add those commas because I wrote the way I speak, and those were missing in the book. So I think it was fine to read it that way, but I couldn't read it. I mean, read it to yourself, but out loud was different. But there really was not, amazingly, not much. And I was going to just tell you the little story about Dan, too. His name is down here. And I had a funny thing happen. 3 years after Mike died, I took my journal notes and I went over to Montana. We have a little cabin there that had been Mike's dad's. And I thought I'd see if I could write. I mean, I'd never done any writing. And so I tried it. And with all these journal notes, trying to figure out how to organize it. Do I go chronologically with time? Do I talk about topics? How do I do it? And after trying, I discovered it was really hard. And I did write, there's a little chapter in there about our love story, which is how Mike and I met. So I did write that. But then coming back, I was in Coeur d'Alene and I stopped at a real funky little place. They have outhouses there and there's some tennis courts. And it used to be a good stop for Mike and I because I could easily get him in and out of the outhouse at that place. at any rate, then I took a little walk up on this hill. It was October. It was rainy. And I had this brief visit with this fellow who was out walking with his dog, literally asked about a monument up there, and then told him where I was going. And he told me he'd lived in Kingston. And I said, oh, I'm going to Bainbridge. I said, how'd you get over here? And he said he was a book mentor. I met a book mentor at a no place in the middle of nowhere in Coeur d'Alene in October. I didn't even know what a book mentor was.
What is a book mentor?
A book mentor was just a phenomenal term to me. And so he said, I told him, oh, that's interesting because I've been trying to write a little bit and it's really hard. I really appreciate what you do. And he said, well, what are you writing about? And I told him, and he said, I can help you with that. He can help me with that. I mean, that's pretty amazing. And so we talked like 10 minutes. I gave him my contact information, and then he got back to me. And we started this collaboration over the next 3 years until the book was published. Essentially, he started the company called Compendium, which is a well-known greeting card, inspirational book company here in Seattle, has since retired. But he just took this on. He didn't charge me a thing. He literally just thought it was worth doing. And he told me to not do anything till I knew who my audience was. What did I have to say that was different than other people? What did I want people to know? And then we started, he said, write stories. And I just randomly wrote stories. And then and of course they went to him for editing. And then we eventually took those and put them together and figured out how we wanted to do it. I wanted a timeline because that was one of the things that was really hard for me. What would happen when? So I wanted stories that had, some journal notes. So journal notes are in there so people know as speech was changing, for instance, over time.
So Rosalys's email is right there, rosalysp@icloud.com.
Good. So can I do my little closure here?
Do your little closure.
Okay. So I just want to put a word out to grandparents. I think probably many of us fall into that category. And, I know we're doing this stay at home, and I know we're separated from grandchildren, and I know that's tough. And so I want to say I've heard people who've been doing birthday parties with grandchildren online. I know people are talking to them, which I've been able to do with my grandkids. I just want to mention my sister in Colorado Springs is having the opportunity to do reading. She does reading with her grandchildren online. She does 30 minutes with one and 30 minutes with the other, which I think is pretty creative. And then I want to just add that she and I, my sister and I, had a great conversation recently, and we were really talking about our grandmother and what a role model she was for us. She lived to 97, and she'd gone through some difficult times and had actually outlived her children, but had her 4 granddaughters. And we just think that Grandma was this beautiful role model for us. And we both were hoping that we can be a role model for our grandchildren now. And I just wanted to bring that to you because I think who we are and what we're about and the model we set and the cheer we can bring to them, I think that's a wonderful gift we can give to people as we're staying at home right now. So I wish you all well, and I look forward to seeing you in person sometime. But this was lots of fun, and I want to encourage you to get my book. That's what we need to do, is we need to sell a few more books and get it out there to people.